Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome back to Homeschool Together. Thank you for joining us. If you have a chance and you're looking to support the podcast, we have links down below to leave reviews. Click on our Gumroad page as well, or the best way to do it is share it with another family or friend who is looking to homeschool. We know we're getting into the springtime and people are getting ready to de-enroll from it's the de-enroll period.
It is, right? We've talked to several families. They're like, okay, this is the year we're going to finish the school year out and we're getting ready. We're enrolling at the parent partnership, or we're going to homeschool next year. Yeah, we're starting to get, 'tis the season.
It's
the
homeschool season.
It really comes closer to May, that April-May time block, but we've seen some early people.
Just in time for the Rainbow Resources catalogs to come in and the Build Your Library discounts in the spring to come filtered in.
The spring sales. And if you want to be kept in the loop about sales, we always put those on our Facebook page. And if we forget to, one of our great listeners will put it on there too. So join the Facebook group because it's a great way to hear about the sales when they come up. If you're waiting for that Right Start Math sale, you got to keep on waiting because that's not happening. But you will. All the digital curriculums typically give sales a few times a year, and we always list when those happen.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be starting a series because that's what we like to do here. I'm very on brand here with Homeschool Together. We like to do...
We're the Netflix of homeschooling.
We're the Netflix of homeschooling. we get you hooked and we keep you going.
That's right.
Hopefully,
we're not going to leave you on a cliffhanger.
Hopefully it doesn't end like Lost or Game of Thrones or something like that. It ends well. That's a good.
There's no White Walkers.
There's no White Walkers here. So today we're going to be talking about a series where we are going to be talking about grouping homeschooling, doing things together as a family, bringing along older learners, actually participating as adults in the homeschooling. So we're going to be talking about these types of concepts over the next few episodes. But today we're going to be talking about the benefits and the reasons to do grouping, why we want to group things together.
Right. Why should we? This is all about family learning, really, because we've had so many of our listeners, and now that we have 2 children we're homeschooling, we're feeling this as well, say like, how can I involve my whole family? I've had a few friends who are interested in homeschooling ask me like, well, okay, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. What should I do? The constant question is like, which level of Build Your Library should I do or whatever? And I actually do want to talk about the 4-year history cycle in another episode. So, stay tuned because it's on my list. I know someone asked me to do that and we will. But the general idea of like, how am I going to homeschool all these children? Should we do stuff together? Should we do stuff apart? So today we wanted to talk about grouping because I feel like many curriculums are really pushed towards individual learning. And so many of us...
And very grade level specific.
Right.
Or
with age specific.
And expecting all of the education at that level or the learner to be at the level of every single subject that is part of that curriculum, which we all know as homeschoolers, and maybe if you're new to homeschooling, that's not necessarily the case.
Right. And, just for our own sanity, sometimes it's great to group, but there are also challenges to grouping. So we just kind of wanted to talk back and forth with you all about it. And then next week, we're going to go into actually adapting curriculum to teach multiple kids. So that's going to be a really good episode next week. But this week, we wanted to just talk about what's the pros and cons? When does this make sense?
Absolutely. So I think when we're talking about the pros of grouping, I think the first thing we're talking about is time efficiency.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, as homeschoolers, veteran homeschoolers, we're probably all nodding our heads.
Are we veterans now?
I think so. Yeah. I think I got the veteran badge.
I feel like we're totally mid-career here, but okay.
I'm kind of like an NBA basketball player who's hit his prime at like 28. I got my first MVP, got a title.
Oh, really? Oh, we're that way?
And I feel like, I got a few more years left before.
How'd you get that Wembanyama?
Yeah. No. I'm more like Nikola Jokic, right?
But what is that? It's very long.
It's Victor Wembanyama.
Thank you.
And he's an alien because he's 7'5" or whatever. Anyway, I feel like we, then all of a sudden you get to you get the veteran contract. They sign you for the long term. I feel like
I see that kind of veteran.
Yeah. We're not that type of veteran. So I feel like we're hitting our flow here. And I think a lot of homeschoolers all see the same thing where we talk about efficiencies.
There's only so many hours in the day.
You had that funny line just a minute ago. I had so many jokes fly through. It was like an eruption of jokes. He said, oh, great, now I'm homeschooling. How do I teach all these children? Right. How do you do it when you have multiple children?
And it seems like we have like lots of time in the day, and we never do. And our friends who don't homeschool ask us, and who are kind of homeschool curious, I would say, and they do ask us like, hey, this must be great. You have all this time. It's like, we actually really don't have very much time because we get up at a reasonable hour instead of, being out waiting for the bus at 7:15 in the morning. And we have chores and things that we do around the house, right? We have things our kids need to do before we start homeschooling. We have our own goals. There's different, I don't know. We have activities and parent partnership and Girl Scouts, and there's not enough hours in the day. There just plain isn't.
Well, I think efficiency is one of those key reasons why you would want to combine various curriculums, to basically teach children simultaneously, to save that time, to make it simpler as well on you for doing any type of planning. Can you imagine, having 4 children and planning 4 different curriculums, social studies curriculums, not just math and reading, but like 4 different social studies curriculums or 4 different history curriculums or 4 different, science curriculums or writing curriculums. That just seems like it's wild, right? It's crazy. And any way to simplify and to make things easier on yourself and treat your homeschool. I wonder if there's an episode in there like the one room schoolhouse. I think that's kind
of like what we do.
I think we've chatted about this in the past where it feels like things are in the homeschool community may look back to, what did teachers do when there were only 12 students,
right? And
there were 6, 7, 10, 13, 15, and 18, right? And they were all at the same schoolhouse, and they're essentially probably doing similar practices as we're doing, we group things and then we differentiate based on the capabilities of those students.
Well, right. And we're not talking about math and reading here because, everyone's on their own levels for that. But
that one's challenging. I mean, if you're blessed enough to have a child who's 2 years ahead of math and the other one who's not, then you could be at the same level.
Right. But that's rarely going to happen.
Case,
that you've got kids who are reading and doing math on exactly the same level. So we are not talking about those when we talk about this. So I think time efficiency is a great one. But the other one, I'm going to say, I don't know if we want to call it mental efficiency or mental streamlining or whatever, but if you're anything like me, I could not be teaching ancient history and the Renaissance at the same time. I can't switch gears that way. Like I can't be like, okay, over here, let's talk all about the ancient Sumerians and let's go over here and hey, here's Michelangelo and blah, blah, blah. Like I would have a really hard time shifting gears that way.
Yeah, right.
So I think that there's a streamlining in that. And I think there's also like, what is this? Like, Ghostbusters, like don't cross the streams.
Don't cross the streams.
Right? So I feel like there's some of that for us, but I also feel like there's some of that for our kids because if we are doing different things, and we have encountered this just reading different books to our girls because of their own levels of understanding. We're reading different chapter books to them that they are intensely interested in what the other one is doing. And so they get distracted as well from what they're supposed to be focusing on because they're interested. So I feel like you have to switch gears and you could easily be distracted and lose your place. Which time period am I in, or which science concepts? Wait a minute, you've already learned this piece and you haven't learned this piece. Like keeping it all organized in my pretty organized brain sounds really difficult to me personally.
Yeah, doing the streamlining I think is really, I think they kind of go hand in hand with the streamlining and the efficiencies. They kind of, it helps you move a little bit easier, a little bit more.
It's just like not as confusing, right? Because if I can keep my kids...
It's grease to the gears, right?
Yeah, if I can keep my kids on the same kind of time period or the same science concepts, then I could say, hey, as a group, we've all learned this piece. And now we'll go to the next piece. And at some point, the youngest one, maybe I have to go back over something that they didn't remember. But by that time, the oldest ones should be out of the house, right? And she can go back over those things. But I just, it's less confusing, I think, for me, and less overwhelming to just teach everyone together.
Well, it's funny. It's kind of structurally the opposite of what they can do in the public schools. They're teaching to a bunch of kids who are all the same level, or the private schools as well, all at the same level, same age. And they're assuming everybody has the same capability within some variation. We are looking at kids who are like multiple years apart. Ours are 3.5. We know some families that are kind of like 1.5 years or 3.5 years.
But they may have 4 of them. So
yeah, exactly.
That's a huge span overall.
We have a friend, she's going to have 4 under 6. And that's wild. I mean, like, think about the stratas there where like every single year you got about a year separate. At some point you kind of cluster them, you know, two olders and the 2 youngers.
And I still think some of this stuff is valuable, even if we're only talking about breaking your larger family into a couple of main groups. I think some of these things really still apply.
Absolutely. The next thing I think is pros is this idea of stronger family bonds. You know, when you are doing collaborative learning and you're having older students teaching younger students, or having younger students, you know, talking about concepts that then reinforce things with the older students, having this kind of communal learning environment, I think it's almost like kitchen table. We always do the homeschool. It's like kitchen table learning, where it's like everybody's doing the same thing and we're all doing similar activities.
It's a collective thing.
Yeah.
And I think through that experience,
there's a sharing element.
The sharing, and through the experiences that they all share together, they grow closer. I know that our girls, and some of the things they have studied, they have really, they share some of the same, oh, remember when we learned about that? And then they're all laughing about it, right? Because they were there together. The field trips we take are applicable to both of them.
Shared experiences.
And I think that helps with their bonds. The other thing is that it really helps develop their social skills. Because they're working on the same thing, that means that they get an opportunity to work in teams on things and, you know, to collaborate. We also get opportunities for different kids to take the leadership position in a group, right? So if we're going to do this group work, it's maybe not always the oldest kid that takes the lead. Sometimes it could be a younger kid. So you have different opportunities for different kids to play different roles in a team, all learning about something or doing an art project or a science experiment or something. And so I think that that's a really good opportunity for them to communicate with each other, because if they're all learning separate things, then they're not getting that chance to, you know, collaborate and communicate.
And even within that dynamic, allowing the, you know, middle age or the younger students to have that level of power in some respects in that situation.
It's very cool.
It's something they probably may not have in maybe the play situation, or even just in the regular social experiences with older siblings. Having that opportunity gives them the confidence to, you know, go forth and do different things.
Well, and I think that that's a really valuable thing as someone who works in corporate, right? I'm in a program management leadership position.
How often are you interfacing with someone who's 20, 30 years your senior? I remember when we first...
Well, it's not 30 years anymore as I get older.
But it was when we first started, right?
It was, right? I have some, you know, I have some engineers who are just about at retirement age, and I am managing their tasking, and I'm asking them for status. And, you know, I have been the boss of older people.
You know, frankly, we're closer to college than we are to retirement. And
that's a scary thought.
I know.
I mean, it's good because I want to feel young, but it's also not because, well, it's a long way to go to retirement. But anyways, but yeah, so I think that it's a really valuable experience for younger kids to get the opportunity to lead over older students, because that's something that they're going to have to do in their life at some point in their career. Depending on what they do, you're not always going to be only managing people your age or younger. That's just not always going to be the case.
Absolutely. And next thing I'm thinking is going with the efficiency and the streamlining is this idea of being cost effective.
Oh yeah, really.
I mean, we have just finished Right Start Math, even though we're not really talking about math and science, but you know, saving money on curriculum, we've just done the second level. I've gone through the same level now twice, and I didn't have to rebuy it, or you know, not having to rebuy curriculum or support multiple levels of curriculum. It's super nice. It's so much easier. It's so much more affordable to vary within that level of curriculum than to, you know, basically support 2, especially if you can keep both kids on the same curriculum and they don't have to have, this social studies curriculum versus this social studies curriculum.
Sure.
Like, my one kid only does Build Your Library. My other one does this other one. And now
especially if they're
2.
literature based and you're buying books. That's how I felt. I was like, okay, well, it's worthwhile for me to buy these books because this is what both of my kids are going to do.
Yeah. Using the curriculum, or even just in some respects, if we talk about stratifying, if you have to like have 4 or 5 kids and you got to peel off 2 of them here and then the 3 over here, if you're using the same curriculums, you can reuse those curriculums.
No, you're coming back around. That's exactly what we're doing with
yeah.
Around the World right now, right? We came back around. It's like, oh, these are all the books. I already have them.
I don't mind spending $7 on these shoes because you're probably going to only wear them for a month and then your sister's going to have them.
Right. Everything is half price.
Everything is half priced. And so like, yeah, if you're thinking about like cost effectiveness, especially in your homeschool, because we all know, I mean, some states I think there's a couple states now that are allowing some monies to be used, but we don't get any funding in Washington for our homeschooling, other than the fact that we go to the parent partnership. But we don't give us
books.
They don't give us books. We do get access to
a couple curriculums.
Couple curriculums, so there's a little bit of cost savings there.
But it's not a lot. Most of our curriculums are self-purchased, and as we know, as homeschool parents, some homeschool parents both work and they do shift work and things like that. But a lot of homeschool families, I would say probably the vast majority, have a parent who is not working and who is playing that main primary educator role, just like you are. And in that case, we want to save. I mean, we want to be cost effective. And so if we can keep the kids together, that means buying science equipment for experiments or art supplies or things. We know that everyone's going to get use out of this. It's more worthwhile to spend that money.
Absolutely. I think the next thing, that kind of comes with that is the idea of customizing content. You may have different learners, you're bringing them together, being able to choose one, curriculum that goes with it. You can, peel something off or bolt something on, something small that you can adjust and be dynamic within this idea of grouping the curriculum without having to go and get something separate that you're doing with
Well, right. And we're going to talk next week about customizing it. But I think the cost effective and mental confusion part of this is we all customize. I think that's like the thing that people who don't homeschool yet don't realize.
That's
is
the
that
dirty little secret that we're all eclectic homeschoolers.
Yeah, we basically can't leave anything alone, right? So if I'm going to teach...
There's a few of you guys out there.
I mean, don't look at me. I customize everything. But... because our kids all have different learning needs and all that stuff. So we're going to customize. If we're doing that for every different curriculum that, all our kids are on different levels of history and whatever, and we're doing that for everything, wow, that's overwhelming. And not cost effective either, because you're buying extra books and things. If you could say like, hey, we've got our one main curriculum and here is how we are going to, take it like a piece of putty and we're going to morph it and pull it and stretch it and do these different things. And we're going to bolt something onto it. We're going to do whatever to make
clay sculpture you're building.
Yeah, to make it work for everybody. But it's one thing that I've got to try to do rather than try to customize a bunch of different things, because I've just come to accept that I'm going to customize. This is what I'm going to do. So you don't have to be like me. You don't have to do as I do. But if that's you, if you know that about yourself, and giving our kids a personalized education is part of the reason why we homeschool. So it's natural to want to do that. We can lessen our work by keeping everybody together.
And we talked a little bit about kind of those social skills developments by having multiple students together. Another benefit that kind of keys in on that is the idea of peer teaching.
Oh yeah, I love this one.
Utilizing older students to support younger students through, teaching those concepts, but also it has a double-edged sword where you have this two students teaching each other. So you don't have to do the instruction. They're doing the instruction. But then also the older student gets the benefit of then teaching back that material that they know, which helps drive mastery. Having that as a piece of your pie, part of that collaborative group effort of your education. And I think we'll talk a little bit about maybe next week or the week after about, like saving time and getting students to do different, their own learning and whatnot. But having students be able to do their own peer teaching, I think, is a strong feature within this group work, this collaborative element of homeschooling.
Right. And we've done this with our daughter,
We
right?
have.
With she has taken the picture books for Around the World, and she has read these to her younger sister. So she's learning, she's getting to practice her reading. Her sister is learning from her, and it's, 5 minutes where they're not antagonizing each other. So that's always nice. So there's a lot of goodness from peer teaching.
Absolutely. So then going into a little bit of the cons now, like what could be the downside of this?
Well, we talked about the varied needs, right? Younger learners may need lots more hands-on support, and olders might feel more neglected, right? You're dealing with everybody together. So invariably, just what happens in a big classroom could happen on a smaller scale in your homeschool, that not everyone's getting an equal level of attention and care because, my 5-year-old takes more time than my 9-year-old. It's just the way that goes. And if you've got a toddler, they're going to take even more time. And,
Especially if you've had a learner who essentially you have the only child syndrome with your older student. So if you're out there right now and you're homeschooling that 7-year-old or that 8-year-old, and this is your first run through homeschooling, and then you have maybe a 3 or 4-year-old who's about ready to start, and your whole existence has been this one child. It's been a one-on-one thing. And then you're going to 1-on-2. So you're now starting to play zone defense. And you're no longer man-to-man. And you're zone defense, and you have to deal with that. And in that handling, that partitioning of your time, you're going to start to develop some emotional issues, social emotional issues of feeling neglect. And it really only comes from my experience so far, has been the older student.
Yeah.
Because they're also hitting this weird thing where we're starting to hit a period of time where they're beginning to transition into more independent learning, independent activities, independent things that they're going to be doing. Like you don't have to read the descriptions. You just give them the sheet and say, read what it says, or here's the activity, here's what it says. You need to be able to read this and write your own answers, right? That type of thing. I don't need to be hovering over you doing, super intensive one-on-one manipulative heavy activities. Like today I gave her, my oldest, an assessment. I'm like, here it is. We did the pre-assessment yesterday. Do you have any questions? No. Okay.
Right.
I need you to do your assessment. I'm going to go do the reading work with your sister. About 1.5 years ago, that would have caused she would have felt hurt a little bit that daddy's leaving me,
right,
and not sitting here watching me take my test. Right. I'm like putting her in another room and saying, here you go. Here's your pencil and paper. I need to go do reading work with your sister. There are some issues there that I've had to overcome in the last year or two. Just having her get used to that, because I've always been there for her from the beginning. My youngest, I can give her an activity and she'll go off and do it because she's been used to playing second fiddle to the older kid.
True.
And so I think there's a little bit of that. So I think there's a little bit of cons there when you're doing this type of group activity that you may ignore one of the children, or there may be some issues.
Right.
That.
I mean, even if you're teaching the same subject together, the younger one's going to need more of your time to help do that science experiment, more time explaining it, whatever, than the older student will.
And what if you're flipped from what I have right now, where maybe my older student had more challenges reading, where I spent a lot more time with her reading. What if she was easier to learn to read and my youngest needs more time? Now I'm spending even more time. Right. I'm very lucky right now that my youngest is, pretty good at math and pretty good at reading. I mean, you saw today, she was reading to you. And I was like, well, what if I had the challenges I had with my older student, but with my younger student, then I would be spending even more time with her as opposed to less.
Absolutely. If you're doing separate curriculums, then you're going to have carved out time to say, hey, this is my time with this child because we're studying this thing. And that's not what this younger one's. So that's kind of like a dedicated time. Whereas if you're doing it all together, it could be easy to overlook your older, more independent child. And I think overlooking is kind of our next point too, that it can be harder to address specific skill gaps, like writing, for example, or specific learning needs, because you're kind of trying to meet everyone's needs with one thing, and you might overlook and not realize that, oh boy, this child's having a particular issue with this piece of it, because you're trying to teach everybody together. And it's kind of the same thing that can happen, again, in a classroom with a teacher, that you don't realize that somebody's maybe falling behind or something. And it's on a much smaller scale, but we have definitely had issues where we didn't realize you have a book for our daughter that, oh shoot, I forgot how to write my name, and it's a notebook.
And I had a moment. She was like with one of her teachers, and they asked her to write her name down on a piece of paper.
She's in third grade, guys. Third grade.
Well, she was in second when it happened.
Okay.
But and she fully knows how to write her name. There's not there's no denying that. And she just froze and she panicked. And she was looking at me. I go, I had the eyeballs, and you have that. I've been educating you for 4 years, and I know exactly what you're thinking. I'm like, are you kidding me? You ain't going to write your name right now?
Right.
And I'm like, yeah. I'm giving her the letters, and I'm like, she's like, okay, thanks, Dad. And I'm like, okay, that's it. That is it. I'm getting a book, and I wrote it on there.
Well, because we realized she doesn't do a bunch of workbooks or worksheets where she writes her name at the top of every one of them.
And she doesn't do it.
Although they have that at the top of the Math Mammoth worksheets, and I think she should have to start writing her name just so she can practice it.
Ariel, I have instituted the Matthew Boozer writing curriculum.
Yeah.
Patent pending.
Yeah, she writes her name a lot now, but it was something that we just didn't realize, right? We were focusing on history and reading and all these
Phonics
things.
and all that stuff.
And teaching her to spell and stuff, and we just, I don't know, that like got left behind.
I tell you what, like,
it was a weird thing, but it did.
My oldest has the benefit of like having a lot of that one-on-one time, but she also has the downside of me making a lot of mistakes, not knowing what I'm doing.
Yeah, totally.
My youngest is getting the full-on, good curriculum,
That's
good,
right,
good
yeah.
teaching.
Yeah.
Like my first is kind of a train wreck a little bit sometimes. But you're right, like the skill gaps and identifying skill gaps, just in a group scenario, it will be tough, especially when you're on one curriculum, because you want to be able to test capabilities and mastery, and there may be some challenges there. Understanding where people are on the level, because you are trying to teach them on this one curriculum. It's hard to test, whether or not they're getting the reading comprehension, if they're fully understanding what we're talking about. What level of memorization do you want them to have when you're talking about like ancient history or ancient civilizations? Right. It is hard to do that, and you have to be a little bit more finesse when you're doing that. So that could be a little bit of a downside and a little bit more challenging to you as an educator, especially if this might be your first time through and you're teaching multiple students. I think another one too would be behavioral challenges.
Yeah. We made the pros sound like it's all lovely. They collaborate and there's teamwork and your stuff, and that lasts for like 5 minutes.
Sort of like the R squared rule. Like it's not just summing two children together. Every time you get a child together, it's like an order of magnitude more potential for chaos. And every time you add in another child, it's not additive, it's multiplicative. So it's like, it's R squared, then it becomes R cubed, and then R to the fourth. Like the numbers grow exponentially on the chaos. And I can't tell you how many times I've said, okay, you young one, you are coloring this picture. You older one are writing these 2 sentences. I need to go upstairs to go get something. And I come downstairs and it's exploded and it's chaos.
Right, and they're fighting. And so, doing everything together sounds very kumbaya until they're all upset at each other because we're all doing something together. The other thing that can be really challenging, especially when they're having bad behavior, is we can get burned out as parents, as educators, right? Because we're trying to balance the needs of all these kids.
All the emotional things, the learning stuff.
With one curriculum. And sometimes it's nice to have them separate. I mean, we've noticed that on the math and reading. It's like, okay, hey, great. Okay, you're going to go over there and read your story for a bit. And I'm going to work with your sister on this math thing. And you can focus. And you can be like, okay, this is where we're at. Calibrate and focus and pay close attention, independent,
But also with when you are doing this, kind of combined curriculum or group work, there's the risk of you adding and bolting on and changing so many things that it almost becomes like you're balancing so many plates that are spinning.
Yeah.
And you can get a little bit of a burnout there because you've made it so custom that it almost doesn't even resemble what the original curriculum was from the beginning, that you've made it something so new that it's almost your curriculum and you're essentially building your own curriculum on the fly. Man, they can get you burnt out really quick.
I know.
And not me, you've done it. Like I'm really the doer and you're the planner. And I've seen that on your eyes. Like, oh God, I got to plan this thing. I got to get this stuff together. I'm like, hey man, maybe we should dump this little piece here and maybe go with what the curriculum was working on, because it just kind of calms everything down.
Well, right. And you can get very overwhelmed as well, because
you
might be trying to make all these adjustments to make this curriculum one thing, this curriculum or this subject or unit study or whatever you're doing, work for all your kids. And maybe that's a really tough thing to do depending on what you're doing. So it can be a real challenge to kind of like fit everybody in the same box, even though you're trying to make, personalized adjustments. It can sometimes be a really difficult thing. And I think it can also lead to some pacing issues, right? Because you've got some kids who are bored because you're not going fast enough for them. And you've got the younger ones who maybe don't know what you're doing. They're lost, right? So you're kind of trying to normalize. We're going to talk about strategies next week about how you can try to different approaches to making a single level or whatever work for multiple kids. But, invariably there is a little something being lost, right? Even if you were tailoring this piece for the older kid, they're still going to be listening to this other stuff that you had to tailor for the 5-year-old. Right?
Very often you are. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So even though you're trying to meet everyone's individual needs, there's a portion of time where they're going to have to kind of go with the group. And that might that's invariably not going to be at the level that they're at unless they're right in the very middle of the group.
And the further your age groups are where you're combining, the more your curriculum looks like you just took two curriculums and smashed them together.
Right.
Like if you have them close enough in age group, you can almost teach that same level. Like our oldest still likes to listen to, the Beeb and Bop books, right?
Right. All the books
kindergarten,
for,
first grade level books, and she's in third and fourth, and we're reading more advanced chapter books to her.
She still really loves.
She still digs it, but I could imagine if you had a sixth grader that'd be like side eyeing you, like
Beeb and Bop,
are we really reading Beeb and Bop right now? Like I could start to see that. So consider, you may have to make different decisions, especially on this pacing issue, especially with how wide your spectrum is on the age ranges that you're teaching. It will start to look like, well, I need to give my older student more complicated material. And now all of a sudden it's starting to look like two separate curriculums that are around the same theme. And that can be a balancing, pacing problem there.
And once you have somebody who's bored, feels this is moving way too slow, or somebody that's left behind, boom, behavioral issues. This is when things happen, right? Because they're not being their needs we're not meeting them where they're at, invariably, because we're trying to kind of make one thing work for everybody. So we want to share some tips to try to make this more successful. Choosing carefully the things that you're going to combine. So choosing themes or topics that really appeal to all the age groups. For example, we're going to do a science summer this year. We're going to do space science. We're going to do Blossom and Roots Level K, space science. Even though our daughter one of them will be a rising first grader and the other one a rising fourth grader. Everyone loves space. And we feel like this is going to work for everybody. It's going to be just fine. You could have a high schooler and space would work. So there are some things that are kind of universal. So choose a theme or a topic that you think will really interest everybody and is something that you can tailor appropriately to the different ages. Like I wouldn't select World War II, for example, because I'm going to have a really hard time tailoring that for a 6-year-old, right? Whereas like space, there's a lot I can do with that. There's a lot of room there. Dinosaurs, right? There's a lot of room. So really just think about the topics that you're going to select and whether you think you can handle the age range that you've got.
Also including a lot of hands-on activities and projects that engage multiple levels, especially when you're doing projects, you can have the older students do more for the same topic and interest. Like totally. if you're talking about some type of ancient civilization, one thing might be an artwork or a day-long project where you're doing something with your kindergarten or first grader. You may be asking your third or fourth grader to do a diorama or something that includes writing, artwork, a little bit of research, a little bit of handwriting, some vocabulary and that type of stuff. So you may be able to differentiate there on the activities that you end up doing.
And maybe they all do the same art project, but one has to do writing about it and one doesn't. This is where field trips are also awesome, because when you take a field trip to a museum or something, then everybody can learn at the right level for them. They take notice of different things.
You may have your older student do journaling activities when they're at those activities and when they're at those destinations as well.
Yeah, so they would call those like a tiered assignments, so that they're different. Also setting really clear expectations for what we're going to do behaviorally and collaboratively. Hey, we are going to work on this. We know that this is a little bit more to your younger sister's level, but we're going to do this. And then I'm going to want you to do this piece. Like really just laying out like this is the plan and this is how we're going to accomplish it. Trying to find a way to meet everybody where they're at.
Well, and then the final thing here, maybe a last tip we can give you is to build an individual learning time for specific educational needs. If there's something specific that needs to be done, you may have to carve out that time.
Well, right. This is to help that feeling of going too slow, especially going too slow, or going too fast. We've had plenty of times where we've been studying something and it's totally appropriate for our third grader. And we just had, when our daughter was pre-K, she would just do clay. We would just say, why don't you sculpt something from this that we've learned about? And she'd be perfectly happy to do it in clay or Play-Doh or whatever. Yeah. And that was an independent thing she could do. Just the same way we're doing our around the world journey right now, our trekking the world. And we have audiobooks I'm pulling in for our older daughter that are above her reading level, but totally within her comprehension level. And she's doing those on her own. She listens to those every evening. And that's something that, she's getting that need. So if you can break off individual parts, if it still works, it's not overwhelming for you, that's a great way to help bring people in at the right level. Then they can come into some things you can do all together.
So just a couple alternatives to group learning. I know sometimes maybe that might not work in the moment. You may need to pivot if something's not working for that day. Rotating one-on-one instruction between each child, just kind of like in a rotation.
Even if you're studying the same subject.
Yep, absolutely.
You could still just say like, okay, we're going to do this piece together. And then with your older sister or brother, we're going to do this piece.
Well, and I strategically take advantage of that because, like, for example, my youngest gets up very earlier in the morning. She's up, going, eating breakfast and everything. Sometimes I'll read the more kid books to her while she's eating. And then the big one comes down. Maybe I'll read a book to both of them, taking advantage of those times to rotate the learning. When you know something might not really fit with the, some age range, you can take advantage of that. Sometimes I also take advantage of times where we are in a certain situation where, like dance classes, where my youngest will be in the dance class. I can do some of the older work with my oldest. We can do more one-on-one work there. We're still doing the same curriculum, but I'm able to give a little bit more of a tailored experience to her while we're still doing the normal stuff without it impacting or having the younger student, impact the older's learning.
Right. And when you can meet the needs of your more needy student, whichever one that is first, and that's, I think, what you do with our younger daughters, because you've met her needs. So by the time you're going into older stuff, she's pretty content to do a coloring page while you're reading an older book, because she's already had your time and attention. So it's really important to think about like what you want to do individually versus what you want to do as a group.
Yeah.
Not everything is going to work as a group, even if we're, beyond math and reading, like not all subjects are going to work. So just be thoughtful.
Don't try to force it if it's not working. Like, you don't have to, like, if science isn't working, if your youngest needs a different one and something with your older, or maybe there's not an interest crossover, you don't force it. You don't have to force the combining, but definitely keep that in mind.
It's an option.
Absolutely. And then also, if you can, leverage your co-ops, leverage any online classes, anything that can add additional time.
Right.
If there's some type of learning that maybe more applicable to an older student, or some type of content that might be more applicable to an older student that maybe the youngest can't handle. If you're doing a dinosaur type of study and you can't handle the new dinosaur movie that was on Amazon, or no, it was on Apple. It was on Apple.
Right, the prehistory.
The prehistory one. It was really intense. Maybe you have a younger learner who might be a little scared of that. Well, great. Have your oldest go watch that on the side, and then you can do some learning over here as well. Like you can split children up based on
leveraging media, or leveraging outschool classes or a co-op.
Like yep.
So, in conclusion, I think that really group learning can be really fun. That's what we practice because our kids aren't that far apart in age and for our own sanity, but it isn't the only way to go. So just really think about your family dynamics, your learners' needs, the subjects that you're going to choose, and whether it all makes sense. Like you think like, okay, if I were 5, I would like to learn about this, and 12, I would also like to learn about this. Okay. Most subjects can be leveled up. It's hard to level everything down.
Very true.
So just remember that. Next week, we're going to talk all about different approaches to take, and depending on the spread of your kids and what you want to do, it could either be that you're trying to make a curriculum that's appropriate for one of them go down or go up, or choose one that's not at either of their levels and make it fit for you. So hopefully that'll be helpful to everybody, and this gave you some things to reflect on when it comes to group learning.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time,
Happy homeschooling!